At 69, she bought the house no one would enter. Her dog found the reason hidden behind the walls. The house sat at the end of a forgotten road, its porch tilted just enough to make you hesitate before stepping closer. People in town didn't explain why they avoided it. They just did. But Eleanor Hayes didn't turn away. She opened the door, and her German shepherd stopped cold, staring at something no one else could see. Would you trust your instincts, or your dog's, if they led you somewhere you didn't understand? The hallway smelled like antiseptic and old paper. Eleanor Hayes noticed that first. Not the words, not the documents, not even the man across the desk explaining things in a careful, practiced tone. Just the smell. Clean. Sharp. Empty. She sat very still in the plastic chair, her hands folded over her purse, listening as if the explanation might change if she didn't interrupt. It didn't. The transfer was finalized last month, the man said, sliding a sheet of paper slightly closer to her. Your brother signed everything before he passed. Legally, the property is no longer part of the estate. Eleanor blinked once. Her brother's house. The one with the narrow porch and the chipped blue railing. The one she had cleaned, repaired, and kept standing through 3 winters after his stroke. She looked down at the paper but didn't read it. Transferred to who? She asked. Her voice sounded normal. That surprised her. Distant relatives on his wife's side, the man said. They had prior documentation. It's all been reviewed. Distant. Eleanor let the words settle. She had never met them. They had never visited. Not once, even when her brother stopped recognizing faces and spent long afternoons staring out the kitchen window. Eleanor had been the one there. Cooking. Fixing things. Paying what she could when the bills got tight. She nodded slowly, as if that might help the room make more sense. And I wasn't informed? She asked. The man hesitated. There it was, just for a second. Then the professional expression came back. The notifications were sent to the address on file. Her brother's address. The house. The one that wasn't hers anymore. Eleanor didn't argue. There wasn't anything to argue with. Paper didn't care who stayed up at night changing bed sheets or heating soup or sitting quietly when the silence got too heavy. Paper only cared about signatures. She stood up carefully, smoothing the front of her coat out of habit more than necessity. Thank you, she said. The man nodded, already reaching for the next file. The conversation was over. Just like that. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. Late afternoon in Tacoma. Gray sky. The kind that pressed low, like it had something to say but never quite said it. Eleanor walked slowly across the parking lot. Her sedan sat where she had left it, faded paint. A small dent near the rear bumper she had never fixed. Inside, Atlas lifted his head. He had been lying across the back seat, but the moment he saw her, he stood up, alert, watching. He didn't bark. He never did unless there was a reason. Eleanor opened the door and sat behind the wheel, closing it with a soft click. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. Atlas leaned forward between the seats, his nose brushing lightly against her shoulder. She reached back and rested her hand against his neck. His fur was warm. Steady. You waited, she murmured. He exhaled quietly, settling his weight just enough to stay close without pressing. Eleanor stared through the windshield. Cars moved in and out of the lot. People walked with purpose, carrying folders, talking on phones, living inside things that still belonged to them. She tried to picture where she was supposed to go. Not next. After. The thought didn't come. Instead, there was just a blank space. She turned the key. The engine started with a familiar vibration. It was almost evening by the time she pulled into the grocery store parking lot. She hadn't planned to stop there. It just happened. A place with lights, people, movement. Somewhere that didn't ask questions. She parked near the edge under a flickering lamp. Inside, she bought a sandwich she didn't really want and a bottle of water she wouldn't finish. The cashier smiled the way people do when they don't know anything about you. Eleanor smiled back. That part still worked. Back in the car, she unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. It tasted like nothing. Atlas watched her, ears slightly forward, not begging, not restless. Just watching. "You don't like this either, huh?" she said softly. He blinked once. That was enough. The sky darkened slowly, turning from gray to something deeper. The parking lot emptied. One by one, cars left. Engines started. Doors closed. Headlights swept across the pavement and disappeared. Eleanor sat with her hands resting in her lap. The sandwich lay half-finished beside her. She hadn't turned the radio on. Silence filled the car. Not loud. Not uncomfortable. Just there. Atlas shifted, circling once before lying down again, this time closer to her seat. His head rested near her elbow. Steady, present. Eleanor looked at the windshield, at her faint reflection in the glass. For a long moment, she didn't think anything at all. Then, quietly, almost as if the thought had been waiting for permission, it came. There was no house, no place waiting for her to return, no room with her things in it, no key, no address that belonged to her name. She exhaled slowly. It didn't feel like panic. It didn't even feel like fear. It felt empty. Like something had been removed, and the space it left behind hadn't decided what to become yet. Atlas let out a soft breath in his sleep. Eleanor turned slightly, resting her hand once more against his fur. "You and me," she said under her breath. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a decision. It was just what was left. Outside, the last light in the store went dark. The parking lot fell quiet. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Hayes sat in a place that wasn't hers, with nowhere else to go, and understood something she had never had to face before. She was no longer expected anywhere, no longer needed, and no one, except the dog sleeping beside her, had noticed. She sat there a while longer. Then she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. Just to stay still long enough for the world to catch up with what had already changed. Eleanor didn't remember falling asleep, only that the sky was still dark when she opened her eyes again. The parking lot was almost empty now. A delivery truck idled near the loading dock, its engine humming low and steady. The flickering lamp above her car had gone out completely. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she became aware of Atlas. He was awake, sitting upright in the back seat, watching the lot through the side window. Not tense, just aware. "You didn't sleep much either, did you?" she said softly. His ears shifted at her voice. "Bora." Eleanor straightened in her seat, her neck stiff, her back tight from the angle. She started the engine. No plan, no destination, just movement. The first place she went was Sylvia's, an old friend. Not close enough to call in the middle of the night, but close enough to knock on the door at 6 in the morning and hope. The house looked the same as always. White siding, a narrow driveway, wind chimes hanging by the porch that made a soft sound when the breeze caught them. Eleanor sat in the car for a minute before getting out. Atlas stepped down beside her, stretching once, then standing close at her side. The porch creaked under her weight as she knocked. It took a while. Then the door opened. Sylvia stood there in a robe, her hair pulled back loosely, eyes still adjusting to the light. Eleanor. There was no hesitation, no question, just surprise, and something else. Concern. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. I should have called. Sylvia stepped back immediately, opening the door wider. Don't be ridiculous. Come in. The house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. Warm, lived in. Eleanor hadn't realized how much she missed that kind of smell until she stepped inside. Atlas followed her in quietly, paws soft against the floor, his body brushing lightly against her leg as if checking that she was still there. Sylvia closed the door behind them. What happened? She asked. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She set her purse down on the chair near the door, took off her coat slowly. It's gone, she said finally. Sylvia didn't ask what. She understood. Oh, Ellie. They stood there for a moment, not touching, not moving. Then Sylvia reached out and pulled her into a brief, firm embrace. Not long. Just enough. You can stay here, Sylvia said, as long as you need. Eleanor nodded once. Just for a few days, she said automatically. Sylvia didn't argue. That was one of the reasons Eleanor had come here. The spare room was small but clean. A single bed, a dresser, a window that looked out onto the neighbor's fence. Eleanor set her suitcase down in the corner. Atlas walked in, circled once, then lay down near the foot of the bed, his body angled toward the door. Watching. Always watching. The days that followed settled into something quiet. Eleanor helped where she could. Dishes, laundry, small things. She kept her movements careful, measured, taking up as little space as possible. Sylvia never said anything about it. But Eleanor noticed the small pauses, the way Sylvia would hesitate before suggesting something, the way she would say, "Make yourself at home," and then move around the kitchen a little differently. Kindness had edges. Eleanor understood that. After a week, she moved on. A motel near the highway, low ceiling, thin walls, a heater that clicked loudly before it started. Atlas didn't like it. He paced the first night, moving from door to window, stopping at every unfamiliar sound. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. It's all right, she said. He didn't settle right away, but eventually he lay down, close enough that his front paw touched her shoe. The next place was a church parking lot, not by arrangement, not officially, just a place where other cars sometimes stayed overnight. Eleanor parked near the back, under a tree. The branches tapped softly against the roof when the wind picked up. Atlas didn't sleep much that night. Neither did she. There were other places, too. Short stays, temporary arrangements, a friend of Sylvia's for 2 nights, a room above a hardware store for 3. Each place had its own rhythm, its own smells, its own sounds at night. And in each one, Eleanor found herself doing the same thing, making herself smaller, quieter, easier to accommodate. Atlas changed too, not in a way most people would notice, but Eleanor did. He stayed closer, watched her more. If she sat too long without moving, he would stand up and walk over, nudging her hand gently with his nose, not demanding, just checking, as if making sure she hadn't drifted too far into whatever silence she carried. One evening, about 3 weeks in, Eleanor found herself at a small diner just off the main road, the kind of place with vinyl booths and a bell that rang when the door opened. She sat by the window, coffee in front of her. Atlas lay beside the booth, tucked neatly under the table, barely visible. 2 men sat at the counter behind her, talking. Not to her, just talking. I'm telling you, no one stays there, one of them said. Where? The other asked. That place up near Alder Ridge. Old house. Been sitting for years. Eleanor didn't turn. She just listened. Why not? The first man shrugged. Things go wrong. People move in, they don't last. Always something. Like what? Does it matter? The man said. You ever see a place that everyone avoids? There's usually a reason. A pause. Price is dirt cheap, though, he added. Guy's been trying to sell it forever. Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. She didn't look back. Didn't ask anything. But the words stayed. On the drive back to the motel that night, she found herself thinking about it. Not the bad luck. Not the stories. Just one simple thing. A place no one wanted. A place no one stayed. A place that was still there. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Atlas was watching her. Not the road. Her. She looked forward again, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the dark. I heard something today, she said quietly. His ears lifted slightly. She didn't say more. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, the empty space in her mind shifted. Just a little. Not filled, but disturbed, as if something had moved beneath the surface, waiting. Eleanor didn't bring it up again that night. But the next morning, the thought was still there. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. She finished her coffee in the motel room, sitting on the edge of the bed while Atlas watched the door the way he always did. The heater clicked on, then off again. A truck passed outside, rattling the window slightly. Let's go take a look, she said. Atlas stood before she even reached for her coat. The drive took a little over 40 minutes. The town changed as she went. Strip malls turned into small storefronts, then into stretches of road with more trees than buildings. The air seemed different, too, cooler, heavier, carrying the smell of damp wood and something faintly industrial that lingered even after the factories themselves had faded. Alder Ridge wasn't much of a town anymore. A few open businesses, a gas station with peeling paint, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the early 80s. Eleanor parked along the main street and stepped out. Atlas followed, staying close, his head level, ears shifting as he took in the unfamiliar place. People noticed them. Not in an obvious way, just small glances. Conversations that paused a second too long. Eleanor walked into a real estate office near the corner. A bell rang softly as the door opened. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old carpet and paper. A man in his 50s looked up from behind a desk, glasses low on his nose. Can I help you? He asked. I heard about a property, Eleanor said. Up near the ridge. The man's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Which one? An older house, she said. Been on the market a while. He leaned back slightly, studying her. That one, he said after a moment. Eleanor didn't respond. The man sighed quietly, then reached for a file. It's still available, he said. Surprisingly, he flipped it open, sliding a photograph across the desk. Eleanor looked down. The house sat at an angle, as if the hill itself had shifted under it over the years. Weathered wood siding, darkened in places by moisture. The porch leaned slightly to one side. Not enough to collapse, just enough to notice. The yard was uneven, patches of grass mixed with bare earth, as if nothing had quite settled properly. What's the price? She asked. The man named it. Low. Lower than it should have been. Eleanor nodded once. Can I see it? The man hesitated, Then he stood, reaching for his keys. "Sure," he said. "I can take you up." The road out of town narrowed quickly. Pavement turned to cracked asphalt, then to packed dirt. Trees lined both sides, tall, close together, blocking out most of the sky. Eleanor rolled the window down slightly. The air smelled like wet leaves and old wood. Atlas shifted in the back seat. Not restless, just alert. They reached the property without any kind of marker. Just a break in the trees, a narrow driveway, half overtaken by weeds, leading up the slope. The car climbed slowly, gravel crunching under the tires. And then the house came into view. Eleanor didn't say anything at first. It looked worse in person. The wood siding wasn't just weathered. It was stained in uneven patches, darker near the base, lighter near the roof. The windows reflected the sky, but not clearly. The glass looked old, slightly warped. The porch sagged just enough to feel uncertain. There was no movement, no sound, no birds on the roof, no insects near the edges, just stillness. The man parked and turned off the engine. "Well," he said, opening his door, "this is it." Eleanor stepped out slowly. Atlas followed, but stopped halfway up the short path. He didn't growl, didn't bark, he just stopped. His body stiffened slightly, ears forward, eyes fixed on the house. Eleanor turned back. "Come on," she said gently. He didn't move. She walked a few steps closer, stopping near the base of the porch. Atlas stayed where he was, watching. The man noticed. "Dogs got good instincts," he said with a dry half-smile. "Most people feel it too." "Feel what?" Eleanor asked. He shrugged. "Hard to explain," he said. "Just something off." Eleanor turned back to the house. She studied it. Not the damage, not the age. Something else. The space around it. The way the air seemed to sit differently here, like it wasn't moving the same way it had on the road. She stepped onto the porch. It creaked under her weight. Not dangerously, just enough to remind her it had been there a long time. The man unlocked the front door. It opened with a slow, heavy sound. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through the old glass. Dust hung in the air, visible where the sunlight reached. Eleanor stepped in. The floor was solid beneath her feet, worn but intact. The walls carried that same uneven look as the outside, aged, marked by time, but not completely ruined. There was a smell, faint, not mold, not rot, something sharper, metallic. She paused. Atlas still hadn't followed. She glanced back. He stood at the edge of the porch now, closer, but not inside, watching her. The man walked further in, gesturing toward the rooms. "Kitchen's through there," he said. "2 bedrooms, basic layout." Eleanor moved slowly, not inspecting, just observing. Every step, every sound. The silence stayed with her. Not empty, different. She walked back toward the door. Atlas met her there, just inside the threshold now. Barely. His body remained angled toward the outside. His head turned slightly toward the interior. Listening. "Strange place," the man said behind her. Eleanor nodded. "Yes," she said. But she didn't step back out. Instead, she looked around once more. At the worn walls, the uneven floor, the quiet that didn't feel like rest. Then she looked at Atlas. He was still watching, still waiting. Not afraid, just aware. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "How long has it been on the market?" she asked. "Couple of years," the man said. "No one stays interested." She nodded again. Then, without looking away from the room in front of her, she said, "I'll take it." The man blinked. "You're serious?" Eleanor turned toward him. "Yes." Outside, the trees stood motionless. Atlas didn't move, but his eyes shifted. From the door to the house, as if something inside had just answered a question he hadn't stopped asking. The paperwork was signed 2 days later. It didn't take long. The man at the real estate office didn't try to convince her otherwise this time. He just moved through the documents with a kind of quiet efficiency, like someone who had stopped asking why a long time ago. Eleanor used most of what she had. Not all, but enough that the number left in her account looked smaller than she liked to see. She didn't dwell on it. There wasn't anything else to compare it to anymore. By the end of the week, the house at Alder Ridge belonged to her. The drive back up felt different. Not better. Just final. Atlas sat in the back seat, his posture the same as before. Alert, steady. But this time he didn't hesitate when the car turned onto the narrow dirt road. He was watching more closely now, tracking things Eleanor couldn't see. The house came into view the same way it had before. Still, unchanged, as if it had been waiting. Eleanor parked near the base of the porch and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she opened the door. Atlas stepped out beside her. He paused, just for a second. Then he walked forward, up the path. Not reluctant this time, but careful. Eleanor followed. The porch creaked under her weight again, familiar already. The key turned slower than she expected. Metal against metal. A small resistance. Then the lock gave. The door opened. The same dim light greeted her, the same still air. She stepped inside, carrying her suitcase behind her. Atlas followed. Fully this time, but he didn't relax. His body stayed low, controlled, ears shifting, listening. Eleanor set the suitcase down near the wall. The house felt different with her things inside. Not warmer, just occupied. She walked through the rooms slowly. Kitchen, living area, back hallway. Nothing had changed, but she noticed more. The absence of sound pressed in more clearly now. No faint rustling, no distant movement. Even the boards beneath her feet seemed quieter than they should have been. She opened a window in the front room. It stuck halfway. The wood swollen from years of moisture. When it finally gave, a rush of outside air came in. Cold, clean. But it didn't carry much with it. No insects drifted in. No distant bird calls followed. Just air. Atlas stood near the center of the room. Still. Then he moved. Not randomly. A slow path. From the front wall to the hallway to the back of the house. He stopped near the kitchen, turned his head slightly, listening. Eleanor watched him. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He didn't respond, not the way dogs usually do. No tail movement, no glance back. Just focus. He walked into the kitchen. Eleanor followed. The smell was stronger here. Faint, but distinct. Metal, not sharp like fresh tools. Something older. Settled into the air. She opened the cabinet doors one by one. Empty. Dry. No obvious damage. The sink faucet turned with a stiff motion. Water came out in a thin, uneven stream. Clear, but cold in a way that felt deeper than temperature. Atlas moved again, to the back wall. He stood there for a long moment, then sat. facing it. Eleanor frowned slightly. "There's nothing there," she said. But she didn't sound certain. She stepped closer. The wall looked like any other, paint worn, a few small imperfections, nothing that stood out. Atlas remained still, waiting. Eleanor turned away. "There's a lot to do," she said, more to herself than to him. She went back to the main room and began unpacking. Not much. A few clothes, basic supplies, things that could be moved quickly if they needed to be. By late afternoon, the light had shifted. The gray outside had softened into something quieter, the kind of light that didn't quite reach into corners. Eleanor sat on the edge of the chair she had pulled near the window. She hadn't brought much furniture, just what could fit in the car. Atlas lay near her feet, but not fully relaxed. His head lifted at small things, sounds Eleanor couldn't hear, or maybe things she didn't recognize as sounds yet. As evening came, she turned on the porch light. It flickered once, then held steady. She watched it through the window, waiting. But nothing came. No insects gathered. No small movements circled the glow. The light existed alone. That bothered her more than she expected. Inside, the silence deepened. Not louder, just heavier. She made a simple meal. Bread, water. A small portion of canned soup heated on the portable stove she had brought. Atlas ate quickly, then returned to his place near the center of the house. Not by the door, not near her. Just there. Watching. Night settled fully. The house shifted with the temperature. Wood adjusting. Small, occasional creaks. Normal. Except they didn't echo the way she expected. They seemed absorbed, like the space didn't carry sound the way it should. Eleanor lay down on the bed she had set up in the front room, a simple mattress. Blanket pulled to her shoulders. Atlas moved once, then lay down near the doorway, between her and the rest of the house. She stared at the ceiling. The quiet pressed in again. Not empty, not peaceful, just present. After a while, she closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, shallow, uncertain. At some point in the night, Atlas stood up. She didn't open her eyes, but she heard it. The shift of weight, the soft movement across the floor. He walked down the hallway. Stopped. Silence. Then returned. He didn't settle immediately. He stood there, listening, then finally lay down again. Morning came without sound. No birds, no distant movement. Just light. Eleanor sat up slowly, her body stiff from the unfamiliar space. Atlas was already awake, sitting in the same spot, facing the same direction, toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen wall. Eleanor rubbed her eyes. "You're going to wear a hole in that spot," she said quietly. He didn't move, didn't look at her, just stayed there, focused, waiting. And for the first time since she had arrived, Eleanor felt it clearly. Not fear, not yet, but something close, a quiet understanding. This house wasn't just empty. It was holding something. And whatever it was, Atlas had already found where it lived. Eleanor didn't move right away. She stayed seated on the edge of the bed, watching him. Same spot, same posture, same quiet focus aimed at the kitchen wall. Morning light stretched across the floor in thin, pale lines, but it didn't seem to reach him fully. He sat just beyond it, as if he had chosen that exact place for a reason. "You're not letting this go, are you?" she said softly. Atlas didn't turn. He shifted his weight once, then stood, and walked straight back to the kitchen. Eleanor exhaled slowly and followed. The smell was there again. Faint, metallic, stronger than yesterday. Or maybe she was just noticing it more. Atlas stopped at the same section of the wall, lower this time, near the baseboard. He lowered his head and sniffed once, then pawed at it. Not aggressively, not like a dog digging or tearing. Deliberate, controlled. One scratch. Pause. Another. Eleanor watched. "It's just a wall," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Atlas stepped back slightly, then sat, waiting, the same way he had the night before. Eleanor crouched down, ran her hand along the wall. The surface felt normal, dry, cool, but when she pressed a little harder, there was a difference. Not obvious, just a subtle give. She pulled her hand back. "It's nothing," she murmured, but she stood up slower than she meant to. The rest of the morning passed with small tasks, unpacking, wiping down surfaces, opening windows that resisted at first, then gave with a tired creak. She tried to make the house feel used, occupied. But every time she stopped moving, she became aware of it again. The quiet, the weight of it, and Atlas, always Atlas. He didn't follow her around the house the way he usually did, didn't stay close out of habit. Instead, he kept returning, back to the kitchen, back to that same spot. By noon, he had done it at least 5 times, walked away, circled, returned, each time more focused, less distracted by anything else. Eleanor leaned against the counter, watching him. "You've never done this before," she said. He didn't respond, just sat there, staring. She grabbed a dishcloth and wiped her hands slowly, then set it down. "All right," she said under her breath. She moved the small table away from the wall, then the chair. Nothing heavy, just enough to clear the space. Atlas stood as she worked, stepping aside but never leaving. Once the area was open, she stepped back. The wall looked the same, uneven paint, a faint line where something might have been mounted years ago. Nothing obvious. Atlas stepped forward again. Closer now. He lowered his head, pressed his nose near the base, then scratched. This time harder. A sharp, quick motion. The sound was different. Not the dull scrape of claw against solid wood. Something hollow. Eleanor froze. "Do that again," she said quietly. Atlas didn't need to be told. He scratched again. Same spot. Same sound. Not loud, but unmistakable. Eleanor stepped closer, knelt down, tapped the wall lightly with her knuckles. Solid. Then a few inches to the left. Still solid. She moved back to where Atlas had scratched, tapped again. The sound changed. Softer, duller, like something behind it wasn't as thick. Her breath slowed. "All right," she whispered. She stood up and walked to her bag, dug through it, found the small multi-tool she kept tucked in the side pocket. Nothing fancy. Just enough. Atlas watched her the entire time. Not anxious, not excited. Just certain. She returned to the wall, paused for a second, then pressed the edge of the tool against the seam near the baseboard. The paint chipped slightly. Old. Brittle. She applied more pressure. The edge slipped in just enough to catch. She pulled. A small piece came loose. Behind it, a darker space. Eleanor stopped, her hand still against the wall, her pulse steady but heavier now. She glanced at Atlas. He hadn't moved, still watching, still waiting. "What is this?" she murmured. She worked the tool again, carefully. Another piece gave, then another. The section wasn't large, but it was enough to see that the wall wasn't what it seemed. There was something behind it. Not insulation, not wiring. Space. A narrow gap. She stepped back, set the tool down on the counter. For a moment, she didn't continue. The house felt different now. Not just quiet, aware, as if something had shifted. Atlas stepped closer to the opening, but didn't go near it. He stayed just out of reach, watching the darkness behind the wall. Eleanor wiped her hands slowly on her jeans. Her fingers felt colder than before. "You knew," she said quietly. Atlas didn't respond, but he didn't need to. Eleanor paused at the opening again, then at the rest of the wall, whatever was behind it. It wasn't small, and it hadn't been meant to be seen. She took a slow breath, then reached for the tool again. "This doesn't stay hidden anymore," she said. Her voice was steady, but lower than before. Outside, the trees remained still. No wind, no movement. Inside, the house held its silence. But now, it felt thinner, like something beneath it had started to rise. And Atlas had never taken his eyes off it. Eleanor stood there longer than she meant to. The tool rested in her hand, but she didn't move. The opening in the wall was small, just enough to see that it wasn't solid, just enough to understand that something had been covered up. She stepped closer again, carefully. The air near the gap felt different, not colder, drier. She leaned slightly, peering into the darkness. There wasn't much to see yet, just a narrow space, and the faint outline of something deeper behind it. Atlas shifted his weight, a small step back. Then he sat again, still watching, still refusing to come closer. That told her more than anything. "You're not going in there," she said quietly. He didn't. Eleanor exhaled slowly and set the multi-tool down on the counter. She looked around the kitchen. Old cabinet, loose drawer, a metal pan. She picked up the pan, testing its weight. Good enough. She returned to the wall and struck the weakened section once. The sound cracked through the silence. Sharp, unnatural in a house that had been so quiet. The panel gave. A section broke inward. Dust fell. A dull, dry scent filled the air. Eleanor stepped back, covering her mouth with her sleeve for a second. Atlas stood immediately. Not forward, not toward the opening, but alert, body tight, watching. Eleanor waited for the dust to settle, then stepped closer again. The hole was bigger now, large enough to see inside. There was a passage, narrow, just wide enough for a person to move through sideways. The walls inside were different. Not wood. Concrete. Rough. Unfinished. Eleanor frowned. "This wasn't part of the house," she murmured. She crouched slightly, looking deeper. The passage extended a few feet, then turned, out of sight. Atlas let out a low breath. Not a growl. Something quieter. Uneasy. Eleanor stood slowly. Her heart was steady, but heavier. Not fear. Not yet. Something else. Awareness. This was built, she said. Not to Atlas, to herself. She grabbed a flashlight from her bag. Small, battery-powered. She clicked it on. The beam cut into the narrow opening. Dust particles drifted in the light. The concrete walls looked old, stained, marked by time. She hesitated only a second, then lowered herself and stepped inside. Atlas didn't follow. He stayed at the threshold, watching her disappear into the wall. The space was tight. She had to angle her shoulders slightly to move forward. The air was dry. Still. No airflow, no sound. Just the faint scrape of her shoes against the floor. After a few steps, the passage opened into a small room. Eleanor stopped. The flashlight beam moved slowly across the space. Concrete floor, concrete walls, a low ceiling. This had been built separately, reinforced, deliberate. Not an accident. Not storage. Something else. There were shelves. Metal. Rust beginning to form along the edges. On them sat containers. Old, industrial, some sealed, some labeled, though the labels had faded. Eleanor stepped closer. Her breathing slowed. She raised the light. Faint symbols. Numbers. Warning markings she didn't fully recognize. But she knew enough. They weren't household. They weren't harmless. She turned slightly. There were papers, too, stacked unevenly on a small metal table in the corner. Folders, loose sheets. She picked one up carefully. The paper was brittle, edges worn. Typed text. Handwritten notes in the margins. Coordinates. Measurements. Words that didn't belong in a place like this. Ground levels unstable. Seal failure risk. Do not excavate past. The sentence cut off. Eleanor lowered the paper slowly. Her mouth felt dry. She turned the flashlight toward the far wall. More containers. More markings. Everything placed with purpose. Everything left behind. Not forgotten. Hidden. Her chest tightened slightly. Not panic. Recognition. This wasn't a storage space. This was something that had been concealed, on purpose. She stepped back toward the entrance. The passage suddenly felt narrower, closer, the air heavier. Atlas was still there when she emerged, exactly where she had left him. He stood immediately when she stepped out, moved toward her, not into the room, just to her. Checking. She rested a hand briefly on his neck. "I'm okay," she said, but her voice sounded different, quieter. Atlas glanced toward the opening again, then back to her. His body stayed between her and the wall now, not blocking, but present. Eleanor looked at the kitchen. The same cabinets, the same sink, the same worn surfaces. But everything had shifted. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt layered, like something had been sitting beneath it all along, waiting. She walked back to the table and sat down slowly, the paper still in her hand. She read the line again. "Do not excavate." She stopped, set it down, looked toward the wall. The opening. The hidden passage. "This is why," she said quietly. Not a question. Not a guess. A realization forming. Atlas lowered himself slowly to the floor beside her, still alert, still watching. But closer now, as if whatever had been hidden wasn't just behind the wall. It was part of the house itself. And now that it had been uncovered, it wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Eleanor didn't go back into the hidden room right away. She covered the opening with a piece of plywood she found leaning behind the shed outside. Not to seal it, just to give herself a moment to think without staring into it every time she crossed the kitchen. Atlas watched the entire time. He didn't try to approach the opening again, but he didn't ignore it either. His attention kept returning there, like a compass that refused to point anywhere else. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep much. Not because of noise. There was still none. But because her mind kept replaying the details. Concrete walls, industrial containers, those words on the paper. Seal failure. Ground levels. Do not excavate. She turned once on the mattress, staring toward the dark outline of the kitchen doorway. What did you find? She whispered into the quiet. Atlas lifted his head immediately, ears forward, not reacting to her voice, to something else. Then, nothing. Just stillness again. Morning came the same way it had the day before. No birds, no distant movement, just light. Eleanor stood at the sink, running the faucet, letting the sound fill the space for a moment. It helped. A little. She turned it off and wiped her hands slowly. I'm not guessing, she said out loud. Atlas looked at her. We're finding out. The town felt different this time, not because it had changed, because she had. Eleanor parked in the same spot near the small diner and stepped out with a quiet sense of purpose. Atlas stayed close, matching her pace. Inside, the bell above the door rang softly again. A few heads turned, same as before, but this time Eleanor didn't pretend not to notice. She walked straight to the counter. The same two men were there. Or maybe just men like them, same posture, same tone. She ordered coffee, waited, then turned slightly. That house on Alder Ridge, she said. The conversation behind her stopped. Just for a second. Then one of the men spoke. You bought it? Eleanor nodded. There was no surprise in his voice, just confirmation. He glanced at the other man, then back at her. You staying there? Yes. A longer pause. The man exhaled through his nose. Then you should talk to Dale. Who's Dale? Used to work the mill, the other man said. Back when things were still running up there. Eleanor didn't interrupt. Knows more about that land than anyone left, the first man added. Where can I find him? The man nodded toward the street. End of the block. Small house with the green roof. Can't miss it. Eleanor thanked them. Finished her coffee. Left. The house wasn't hard to find. Green roof, faded paint, a truck parked out front that looked older than both of them. She knocked once. Waited. The door opened slowly. Dale was older than she expected. Mid-70s, maybe more. Lean frame, hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime doing real work. He looked at her without speaking. You're Dale? She asked. He nodded once. I'm Eleanor. I bought the house on the ridge. That was enough. His expression changed. Not shock. Something closer to resignation. Come in, he said. The inside of his house smelled like wood and coffee. Simple. Clean. He gestured to a chair. Eleanor sat. Atlas stayed near her side, but his eyes moved around the room, tracking everything. Dale poured coffee without asking, set a mug in front of her, then sat across from her. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor held his gaze. Yes. Dale nodded slowly. About time someone did. Eleanor didn't react. Tell me what you know, she said. Dale leaned back slightly, his chair creaking under the shift. Back in the 70s, he began, there was a small operation up there. Not official, not the kind you'd see on a map. What kind? Manufacturing, he said. Parts, chemicals. Nothing big, but not clean either. Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. They shut it down quick, he continued. Too quick. No cleanup. No proper closure. Just locked the doors and left. And the land? Dale looked at her. They buried it. The words sat between them. Heavy. Eleanor didn't move. Barrels, waste. Whatever they didn't want to deal with, he said. Out of sight, out of mind. Why didn't anyone report it? Dale gave a short, dry breath. Different time, he said. Different rules. People didn't ask questions if the paychecks kept coming. Eleanor thought about the room behind her wall. The containers, the labels, the house, she said. What happened to the people who lived there? Dale looked toward the window. First family stayed a year, he said. Got sick, moved out. Second? Didn't last 6 months. Eleanor felt the weight of it settle deeper. And after that? People stopped trying. Silence filled the room. Not empty, not light, just settled truth. Atlas shifted slightly beside her. Eleanor looked down at him, then back at Dale. You knew all this, she said. I knew enough, he replied. Why didn't anyone say anything? Dale met her eyes. Would you have believed them? He asked. Eleanor didn't answer, because she knew. She probably wouldn't have. Dale stood slowly, walking to a shelf near the wall. He pulled down a folded piece of paper. Old, worn. He handed it to her. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. A map. Rough, hand-drawn, sections marked, lines crossing areas she recognized from the property. Where they buried most of it, Dale said. Her eyes moved across the paper. The markings, the boundaries, and one section, near the house, near the kitchen. Her chest tightened. That's under, she began. Dale nodded. Yeah. Eleanor folded the paper slowly, her hands steadier than she expected. Thank you, she said. Dale gave a small nod. You're still staying there? He asked. Yes. He didn't try to change her mind, didn't warn her again. Just looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, Then don't ignore your dog. Eleanor stood. Atlas moved with her immediately. They walked back out into the afternoon light. The sky hadn't changed. The town hadn't changed. But everything felt clearer now, sharper, more defined. As she drove back toward the ridge, the road seemed narrower, the trees closer, the air heavier. She pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. The house stood exactly the same. Still, waiting. Atlas stepped out first this time. No hesitation. No pause. Straight toward the porch. But his pace was different. More direct. More certain. Eleanor followed. The door opened. The silence greeted her again. But now she understood it. Not emptiness. Absence. A place where things should have been, but weren't anymore. She looked toward the kitchen, toward the wall, toward the hidden space behind it. They buried it, she said quietly. Atlas stood beside her, watching. And this time, she wasn't guessing anymore. She knew. Eleanor didn't rush. That was the first thing that changed. Before, everything had been reaction, moving from place to place, adjusting, adapting, trying not to fall behind whatever life had already decided for her. Now she slowed down, not because things were safe, because they weren't, but because rushing wouldn't help. She stood in the kitchen, looking at the plywood leaning over the broken wall. Atlas stood beside her, not tense but present, always present. We're doing this the right way, she said quietly. He shifted slightly, listening. That afternoon, she walked the property, not quickly, not casually, carefully. The ground felt uneven in places, not visibly at first. But when she paid attention, really paid attention, she noticed it. Subtle dips, areas where the soil felt softer underfoot, places where the grass didn't grow evenly. She stopped near the northeast edge of the yard. Atlas froze beside her. His body stiffened just enough to be noticeable. He didn't step forward, didn't sniff, just stood there, refusing to move further. Eleanor looked down. The soil looked darker here, slightly discolored, not fresh, old, settled. She stepped back, immediately. Atlas relaxed. Just a little. That was enough. Okay, she murmured. She didn't need to test it further. She walked the perimeter instead, marked what she could remember, not with tools, just mentally. Mapping it the way she had learned to remember things over the years, by repetition, by stillness, by noticing patterns other people missed. By evening, she had made her decision. She went inside, sat at the small table, picked up her phone, and made the call. It took longer than she expected. Being transferred, placed on hold, explaining things twice, 3 times. Each person asking the same questions in a different tone. Are you reporting an active hazard? I believe so, she said. Can you describe the nature of the materials? I can describe what I found, she replied, and I can tell you there are documents referencing buried waste. There was a pause on the line, a different kind of pause, more serious. We'll need to send someone out, the voice said finally. I understand. Please avoid disturbing the area further. I haven't, she said. That part was true. She hadn't touched anything beyond the wall. After the call ended, Eleanor sat still for a moment. Atlas moved closer, rested his head lightly against her knee. Not asking. Just there. You did your part, she said softly. He exhaled slowly. The next morning, the smell was stronger. Not overwhelming, but noticeable, especially near the kitchen. Eleanor stood by the sink, her brow tightening slightly. Atlas paced once, then returned to his spot. Same place, same wall. But now there was something else. He didn't just watch. He listened. His head tilted slightly, ears shifting in small, precise movements, tracking something. Eleanor turned off the faucet. The silence returned, and for the first time, she thought she heard it too. Not a sound. Not exactly. More like absence. A space where sound should have been. A hollow stillness beneath everything else. She stepped back from the counter. All right, she said quietly. She grabbed her coat. They went outside. Fresh air helped, even if it carried that faint metallic edge now that she knew what to look for. By midday, a vehicle pulled into the driveway. White, unmarked except for a small state emblem on the door. 2 people stepped out, one older, one younger, both wearing practical clothing. Work clothes. The older man approached first. You the one who called? He asked. Eleanor nodded. Yes. He introduced himself. Didn't waste time. Show us what you found. Eleanor led them inside. Atlas followed, but stayed slightly behind her this time. Watching. The man paused when he entered the kitchen, not because of the wall, because of the air. You smell that? He said to his partner. She nodded. Yeah. Eleanor stepped aside, pointed to the plywood. They removed it. Carefully, the opening remained, unchanged. The man crouched, shined his light inside. His expression didn't shift much, but something in his posture did. More alert, more focused. He stood slowly. "All right," he said. "We're going to take a closer look." They entered the passage. Eleanor stayed back. Atlas didn't move. He sat, eyes locked on the opening. Minutes passed. Not long, but long enough. When they came back out, the younger one was writing something down. The older man looked at Eleanor. "You did the right thing calling this in," he said. Eleanor didn't respond. She already knew that. "What is it?" she asked. The man hesitated, just slightly. "Old industrial waste," he said. "Stored improperly. Probably sealed up decades ago." "Is it dangerous?" Another pause. "It can be," he said. "Depends on what's in those containers and how stable they are." Eleanor's eyes didn't leave his. "And the ground?" He nodded slowly. "We'll need to test it," he said. "But based on what you've described, and what we're seeing—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor felt it settle. Not panic, not fear. Something heavier. Real. "What happens now?" she asked. "We secure the area," he said. "Run tests. Figure out the extent." "And the house?" The man looked around, then back at her. "That depends on what we find." Silence filled the space again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight, direction, movement. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was active, shifting, expanding beyond the walls. As the officials stepped outside to make calls, Eleanor stood in the kitchen. Atlas moved closer again. Not watching the wall now, watching the door, watching everything. "Things are moving," she said quietly. He didn't respond, but his posture said enough. Outside, the air felt different. Not just still, tense. As if the ground itself had been waiting for someone to finally notice, and now that someone had, it wasn't going to stay buried. The next few days moved faster than anything that had come before. Not chaotic, not loud, just steady pressure. White trucks came and went along the narrow road. Markers appeared in the yard. Small flags pushed into the soil, each one placed with careful precision. Sections were measured, photographed, noted. Eleanor stayed out of the way. Not because she was told to, because she understood the rhythm of people doing work that mattered. Atlas stayed close to her, but his focus had shifted. He no longer watched the wall or the opening. Now he watched the ground. Every step Eleanor took, he matched. But when she moved toward certain parts of the yard, he slowed, paused, redirected. Quiet corrections, like he was mapping it too. One morning, a man in a suit stepped out of a black car that didn't belong on that road. Clean shoes, pressed shirt, the kind of person who didn't usually come out here. He approached Eleanor as she stood near the porch. "Ms. Hayes?" he asked. "Yes." He offered a card. She didn't take it immediately. "I represent a company connected to the former operations on this land," he said. Eleanor looked at him, not surprised. It had been coming. "You're here quickly," she said. He gave a small, controlled smile. "We prefer to address these matters efficiently." Eleanor took the card, glanced at it, didn't read it fully. "What do you want?" she asked. "To discuss options," he said. compensation, resolution, avoiding unnecessary complications. Eleanor folded the card once, then slipped it into her pocket. The state's already involved, she said. Yes, he replied, but there are ways to handle things privately. Atlas stepped slightly forward, not aggressive, but present. The man noticed, paused, then adjusted his stance just enough. Eleanor saw it. Nothing about this feels private, she said. The man nodded once. Think about it, he said. We'll be in touch. He left as quickly as he had arrived. The car disappeared down the road, leaving behind a faint trail of dust that settled slowly over the gravel. Eleanor stood still for a moment, then turned back toward the house. Inside, the air felt different again. Not heavy, not silent in the same way. More active, like everything had been stirred. She sat at the table. Atlas lay down beside her, his head resting near her foot. You see how fast that was? She said quietly. He didn't move, but his breathing remained steady. She pulled the card back out. Read it this time. Names she didn't recognize. A company that had changed hands more than once. Layers. Distance. But still connected. They thought no one would find it, she murmured. Later that afternoon, another call came. Different tone, different purpose. A lawyer, recommended through the state office. Clear voice, direct. Ms. Hayes, your property is now part of an active environmental investigation, the woman said. You have rights, but also risks. It's important you understand both. Eleanor listened, didn't interrupt. You may be approached by representatives offering early settlements, the lawyer continued. Those offers are rarely in your favor. I've already been approached, Eleanor said. A pause. Then I would advise you not to agree to anything until we've reviewed the full situation. Eleanor glanced out the window. At the markers in the yard, the workers moving carefully between them. I'm not agreeing to anything, she said. Good, the lawyer replied. Because based on initial reports, this land may be more valuable as evidence than as property. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair. That made sense. More than anything else she had heard so far. Can you help me? She asked. Yes, the lawyer said. But I need you to stay patient. Eleanor let out a small breath. Patience, I understand. The call ended. The house grew quiet again, but not empty. Never empty now. Atlas stood and moved toward the door. Eleanor followed him outside. The late afternoon light stretched across the yard, catching on the flags, the equipment, the disturbed patches of soil. It didn't look like the same place anymore. Not the abandoned house, not the forgotten land. Now it looked like something being uncovered, layer by layer. Truth replacing silence. A truck passed slowly on the road. Someone glanced toward the house. Didn't stop, but didn't look away quickly either. People were noticing now. That was new. Eleanor walked to the edge of the yard, stopped, looked out across the uneven ground. All the places Atlas had avoided. All the places she hadn't understood before. You kept me away from it, she said softly. Atlas stood beside her, still, calm, but attentive. She reached down and rested her hand against his neck. Warm, solid, real. They're all coming now, she said. Lawyers, officials, companies, people who had ignored the place for years, all because something hidden had finally been seen. Eleanor looked back at the house, the porch, the window, the kitchen wall that had started it all. I'm not stepping back this time, she said. Not loudly, not with anger, just certain. Atlas remained beside her, watching the same direction, the same ground, as if he already knew. This wasn't over, not yet. But it didn't stay that way for long. Weeks turned into months. The trucks kept coming at first, then fewer, then none. The flags in the yard disappeared one by one, pulled from the soil as measurements became reports, and reports became decisions. Eleanor didn't rush any of it. She stayed, watched, listened, answered questions when they came, and said no when she needed to. The company's representatives returned twice. More careful this time. Less confident. The second offer they brought wasn't quick. It was structured, measured, and very different from the first. Eleanor sat at the same kitchen table where everything had started, the same place where Atlas had first refused to look away. The lawyer spoke quietly across the phone. "This resolves liability," she said, "transfers responsibility, and secures your position fully." Eleanor looked out the window. The yard was still uneven, still marked by what had been buried beneath it, but it didn't feel the same. Nothing did. "All right?" Eleanor said. Her voice was calm. "Certain. I'm ready." The papers were signed a week later. Not in a rush, not under pressure, on her terms. She didn't return to the house after that. Not to stay. Only once more. To stand in the doorway. To look at the kitchen. The wall. Now properly opened. No longer hidden. Atlas stood beside her. Still, but different. His body relaxed. Ears at ease. No tension in his stance. No watching. No waiting. "You're done with it too," she said quietly. He looked up at her, then back at the empty space where the wall had been. Nothing held his attention anymore. That was how she knew. They left that same afternoon. No hesitation. No second look. The road down from Alder Ridge felt shorter this time, or maybe it just didn't carry the same weight. Months later, the air smelled different. Salt, wind, open space. Eleanor sat on a wooden bench outside a small coastal rental, the kind of place that didn't try to impress anyone. Simple, clean, enough. Atlas lay stretched out beside her, fully relaxed, eyes closed, breathing slow, deep, the way he hadn't since before all of it began. She watched him for a while, then looked out at the horizon. The ocean moved steadily in the distance, waves breaking in a rhythm that didn't ask anything from anyone. Just there. People passed occasionally along the path. Some nodded, some didn't. No one looked twice. And for the first time in a long while, that felt right. Eleanor rested her hands in her lap, still, unhurried. The wind moved lightly through her hair, the kind of movement that didn't carry tension with it, just motion. She thought about the house, not as something lost, not as something gained, but as something that had been waiting, not for her, for anyone willing to stop, to notice, to listen. Most people hadn't. They felt something was wrong, and they left. That was enough for them. But the truth hadn't gone anywhere. It stayed, quiet, unseen, until someone finally asked the right question and followed it, all the way through. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Atlas shifted slightly beside her, then settled again. No tension, no alertness, just rest. She looked at him. "You were right," she said softly. He didn't open his eyes. Didn't need to. She turned back toward the ocean, watched the horizon stretch across the distance. Clear, open, nothing hidden. Some places are avoided because they feel empty, but sometimes they're avoided because something is there. Something people don't want to understand. And sometimes all it takes is one person to stop walking away. Eleanor sat there a while longer, not thinking about what had been, not worrying about what would come next. Just present. For the first time since that quiet hallway in Tacoma, she wasn't waiting for anything to change. It already had. And beside her, Atlas slept. Peacefully. As if the question he had been asking all along had finally been answered. Atlas didn't move. Not even when a gull cried somewhere above the water. Just breathing. Deep. Steady. The way he never did in that house. Eleanor watched him for a long time, because she understood it now. He hadn't been afraid. He had been trying to tell her something.
Back then, when everyone else walked away, when the place felt wrong in a way no one could explain, he didn't leave. He stayed. He listened. He kept going back to the same spot again and again, like it mattered more than comfort, more than rest. And she almost ignored him, almost treated it like noise, like something to push aside just to make it through another day. But he didn't stop. And because he didn't stop, neither did she. And while stepping up the ocean, softer now, Eleanor leaned back slightly, eyes tracing the line where the water met the sky. On those years, doing what was expected, staying where she was placed, accepting what was handed to her. And in the end, it wasn't trend that trained things, it was attention, it was choosing just one, not to turn away from something that didn't make sense. She glanced down at Alex again. You knew, she said under her breath. His ear flicks that was on. If something in your life keeps pulling your attention back, quietly, patiently, refusing to be ignored, would you listen to it or walk away like everyone else?